So what did I find out? I found out that people used empathy-related skills, reasoning-related skills, reflection-related skills, and information-related skills in all of the conditions. So regardless of if they were playing the game or in the written scenario, they were using a ton of skills. So any kinds of attitudes that people aren't practicing skills in general in games, it was not founded at all. They were definitely thinking through those scenarios quite deeply. In general, what I found was there was a trend for more reflection and empathy related skills in games versus in the written, where there was a slight more information gathering and reasoning skills in the written scenario. And the reason for that, I mean, there wasn't much of a difference in the reasoning skills, but in information gathering, the information wasn't just there in the context of playing the game, so they asked a lot of questions about what was happening. So I think they had to ask more questions because they didn't have the context of the game to provide them with those answers. And so I just kind of created a model of how people were thinking through kind of the skills and thought processes that they were using when they were thinking through the game. And so, you know, you could see that reasoning, empathy, and information gathering and reflection were all important categories of skills and thought processes. And then there were these drivers, and the drivers are the kinds of things that, you know, the kinds of ways that they were driven in making these decisions. So sometimes they might have answered an ethical decision one way because of their own personal ethics. For example, you know, some people were like, oh, I'm not building a brothel, I don't believe in that, that's wrong, you know, and other times people were interested in building a relationship. So for example, oh, well, I don't want to hurt that person because they're my girlfriend and I don't want that person to be harmed in any way, so I made the decision because of this. And other times they're thinking about game status and they're like, well, I'm going to get the most moral points because of this decision, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this decision because of that. So these were like drivers. It wasn't necessarily skills that they were using, but they were the ultimate driver of why they decided to make the decision they did. And then something, you know, that I found is that it was just slightly different from those people who were in the written scenarios. They weren't obviously interested in, as you can see, game status because they weren't playing a game. They were more interested in just status in general and achievement in general. And they weren't, as you can see, interested in having different kinds of game experiences. They were interested in different kinds of story experiences. So it was like, you know, very similar kinds of ways of thinking about it. It was you know, a slight format difference, but because the ethical scenarios themselves were the same, there weren't as many differences in the way that they actually thought through them. So it wasn't the fact that it was a game, it was rather the fact that it was different scenarios that really influenced how people were thinking through those scenarios. So if a scenario involved people, they might have used more empathy-related skills, right? Some interesting findings, though, were that people in the game used empathy-related skills because if they actually saw the relationship with a character in the game grow over time. So, for example, in the game, they may not have been as focused on using empathy-related skills on characters that they didn't know. So in the game, they might have seen someone in the beginning and the important to them in the beginning, but by the end of the game, because they had fought with this person, they had, fought alongside this person, they had been mentored by this person, they had married this person, those kinds of things that they actually saw with their own eyes and they played, then their empathy-related skills definitely went up. Whereas in the written scenario, when I said, oh, well, they're your friend, they just imagined their own friend, you know, their idealized friendship, and then they might have used those empathy-related skills right away for those people, even if they hadn't seen the relationship grow over time. Now, for those people who were in the game scenario, they actually used more empathy-related skills in that scenario, that drill scenario that was outside of the game, as compared to those people in the written scenario. And some possibilities is that maybe in putting yourself in someone else's shoes in a game for the whole time helps you become more aware of putting yourself in someone else's shoes when you were looking at a scenario that was outside the game. Other really interesting findings is that all of the participants in the game ended up benevolent in that they made enough good decisions throughout the game that they ended up with the good ending, right? The good guy ending. So, I wasn't interested in looking at the good, are they good decisions or bad decisions? But even if they made bad decisions, they still thought through the game in really complex ways. And half the participants in the game actually reached out to real people to help them in thinking through the decisions. So they would say, hey, Dad, can you help me think through this decision in the game? No one in the written scenario reached out to anyone. So a lot of those ideas and myths that, people in games are not reaching out to other people, that they're loners and that they're isolating themselves wasn't true at all. Half the people were really reaching out to other people to help them think through that. So they're thinking collaboratively. One thing I found is that those people playing as male or female, there wasn't much of a difference. There were few differences in whether or not people played as a male avatar or a female avatar. And people playing as a female avatar might have been kind of grumbling at first, oh, I'm playing as a female, and maybe at first they didn't identify with her as much. But as they went through the game, they thought they thought through the decisions, and they saw those decisions reflected in that avatar. They started to embody that avatar by the end of the game, and by the end of the game, they really just, they weren't thinking of that as separate as themselves. However, those people as a female, they would more role-driven in that they thought of themselves as playing as a role, rather than really thinking that the avatar was themselves. Whereas those people who were men playing as men really thought, okay, well, this is me. I'm playing this game. I'm the one running around. I'm the one making these decisions. I'm the one who's embodying my avatar. And so, very quickly, because I want to leave some time for questions, I just wanted to give you a little bit of sense of some design elements that are really interesting. And of course, please email me at the end. I can give you all so much more detail on this. But just some things just to note when you're designing a game is that, things like customizability, gender of avatar might matter at first, but maybe not over time. Context was so important. Relationships grow, you have to see those relationships grow over time in a game. Openness of choices, people feeling like they're, not just having a black or white choice, but having more subtle choices. Consequences, people being able to see the consequences. So if they decide to preserve the lake or decide to drain the lake for money, actually seeing the consequences of that in the game really matters. For example, one person, he did something bad. He accidentally, killed someone who was good in the game. And then the townspeople in the game were yelling at him in the game, and they were, saying, "Why did you murder that person?" The guy's daughter in the game was saying, "Why did you murder that guy?" And that really affected him and emotionally affected him and made him realize, I have to be careful next time who I accidentally shoot at, so I don't shoot some innocent person, because I don't want everyone in the game yelling at me. And then keep in mind that all these so-called people in the game, they're digital characters, right? They're digital creatures. They're not real people. There's no real people behind these people, okay? And yet the people playing the game, really, it mattered to them that their friends in the game, their mentor in the game stayed alive. It mattered to them that they didn't hurt innocent people. They really cared about those people in that town to make sure they all stayed alive at the end. Some people spend an extra 20 hours playing the game just to make enough money so that they wouldn't have anyone die in the game. Okay, and these are all real, not real people. They're all just non-playing characters. So consequences really mattered to them. Even though they were playing a game, it felt like it really mattered, and they made choices that were the kinds of choices they would make if they were facing that in real life. They were thinking through it as if it was a real choice, an authentic choice. So just, thinking about the implications, educators should consider that, participants might be able to practice ethical thinking skills in something like Fable 3. Researchers should think about the fact that games themselves might be legitimate sites of study for researching ethical scenarios, right? Games themselves, so even just, thinking about ethical scenarios, how do people think through ethical scenarios? Well, maybe games are good ways to actually think about that. Designers should think about that, that there may be certain ways that, games themselves may support different ways of thinking or similar ways of thinking, and they should be aware of that. And parents should think that, it's not just about violence and sexism in games or the negative parts of games, but there might be other ways of thinking about games, other potentials of games. I leave you with, because I want people out there to be thinking about these questions. These are the questions that are driving me in my career. These are the ways that I'm really thinking about this. So, how do people make decisions in games when there's real people involved? So if those people weren't fake people, digital characters, what if there were real people behind them? Would they make other kinds of decisions? Would they think through those decisions differently? How do people make ethical decisions when there's a real-world context in an augmented reality game? If they're running around the city doing a game with real people, what happens then with real places? What happens then? What if the participants were female? So I only used men in this, right? I only looked at how men were playing as men or men were playing as females. What if the participants were female? And then what is the relationship among engagement? So is there something about games being more engaging, right? If there are ethical decisions, because I noticed that people were spending a lot of time thinking through those decisions. One person spent 5 minutes just staring at the question, wondering, what should I do here, when they were playing the game. So I would just want to leave you with a final note, which is that as we delve deeper into the field of ethics in games, it ultimately invites us to reevaluate what it means to be human and to gain insight into our own humanity. Through games and play, we are seeking new ways to experience the world, to understand humankind, to reflect on our identities, our destinies, our pasts, and our mysteries. And I hope that you guys can ask some questions, and definitely also email me at kschrier@gmail.com. I can send you a copy of this research. I can answer more questions, but please start asking me questions now. And I think you can write the questions in, not sure, but please feel free to share any questions you have. Thoughts, comments?